What is the difference between assumption and inference questions? Have you ever wondered how to tackle the tricky parts of the law school admission test, specifically the difference between assumption and inference questions? Understanding these two types of questions can make a big difference in your preparation. Let's break it down. Assumption questions ask you to find an unstated premise that the argument relies on. This is something the argument takes for granted but does not say outright. If the assumption is false, the whole argument falls apart. Think of it as a missing piece that completes the puzzle of the argument. On the other hand, inference questions requiring you to identify what logically follows from the information given. Here, you are looking for a conclusion that must be true based on the provided facts. Unlike assumption questions, inference questions do not ask you to find something that is not stated. Instead, they focus on what is directly supported by the text. Now, let's talk about how these questions relate to the arguments presented. In assumption questions, the argument usually has a conclusion and supporting statements, but there is a gap that the assumption fills. This gap is what makes the argument logically sound. A good way to test your answer choice is to negate it. If negating the choice weakens the argument, it is likely the correct assumption. In contrast, inference questions treat the entire stimulus as true. Your job is to find an answer choice that must also be true based on that stimulus. There is no need to identify gaps or unstated premises because the inference is directly supported by the information provided. When it comes to logical relationships, assumptions are conditional. The validity of the argument depends on the assumption being true. If the assumption is false, the argument fails. Inferences, however, are deductive consequences. They follow necessarily from the information given without needing any extra unstated information. For practical approaches, the assumption negation technique is a common strategy for assumption questions. You negate each answer choice to see if the argument breaks down. The correct assumption will weaken or invalidate the argument when negated. For inference questions, the best strategy is to eliminate answer choices that are not strictly supported by the stimulus or are too extreme. The correct inference is the one that logically must be true based on the information provided. In the context of legal reasoning, understanding assumptions is vital. Legal arguments often depend on certain unstated premises. Identifying these can reveal weaknesses or strengths in the reasoning. Drawing inferences is equally important for interpreting laws, case facts, or evidence. Conclusions must be logically drawn from the data without adding speculation. In summary, assumption questions focus on what an argument requires but does not state, while inference questions focus on what logically follows from the given information. Mastering both types is essential for law students preparing for the law school admission test, as they reflected core skills in legal analysis and reasoning.